Hi, I'm Robert, and I'm the professor for Pluralist and Heterodox Economics at Karlshochschule International University in Karlsruhe, Germany.
And what is this actually, Robert?
That's a great question. Well, it's basically teaching and researching economics as if climate change, inequality, poverty, and society in general mattered for economics.
Is this a new kind of position, or is this a new way to approach economics? Tell us a little bit about this, pluralist and heterodox economics.
Sure. I mean, the answer was a bit tongue-in-cheek. Of course, there are lots of heterodox economists, meaning economists who do look at the study of economics a little bit differently. So not just, for example, through the neoclassical, the old traditional way of doing economics through that specific lens, but combining different interdisciplinary or even transdisciplinary orientations on economics, like feminist economics, behavioral economics, complexity economics, evolutionary economics, and so on and so on. There are many different perspectives on economics, and this is a professorship that tries to, give students an overview of what's out there.
It is also a new master program, right? To offer students what was not there.
Yes, we hope so. So there's a new master, which is called Master in Transformation, Philosophy, Politics, and Economics, where we give master students the chance to do a PPE master. People usually know PPE, Philosophy, Politics, Economics in the bachelor, but this is a PPE master. And in that master, we understand this economics part as pluralist and heterodox economics, like multidisciplinary way of looking at the economy. That's what we try to work together on with the students.
Can you tell us a little bit what are going your students to learn during your lessons?
It's to be undisciplined, I hope. So in the sense of not clinging too hard to a certain discipline to understand the world. So the idea is that master students get an appreciation for all the different ways in which the economy can be thought. Right? So they do read the classics, of course. They do understand also neoclassical economics, of course. But they also know, okay, what is currently researched? What are the new papers, the new scientific articles about? And then use it to help transform the world, to make the world a more sustainable and just place. But it's less a focus on specific, for example, mathematical methods, but more looking at, okay, how have different thinkers really tried to understand the economy. That's what I try to teach the students. But it's less, me teaching students. It's more like a collaborative process of us teaching each other and working together on topics of pluralist economics.
What are the problems or what are the challenges that, of course, we did not face or face enough or face in the way that we needed from the past that brought the university or brought you to have this kind of approach?
Lots of problems, of course. I mean, look at how we need to have answers to the climate crisis, but not just the climate crisis, but the overlapping crises of sustainability, which include both the societal domains, so justice questions, and the kind of planetary boundaries questions of biodiversity, pollution, climate, and so on. What we need is holistic approaches, even though I don't really like the word, but we need to understand how these crises are connected, and also how the solutions that we need to figure out need to create synergies to solve many different problems at the same time. So one thing that I really like is, of course, the Sustainable Development Goals, because they give this framework showing that we have these many different, challenges, and we have to look at all of them at the same time. And that's complex, right? But the world is complex, and I think a new type of economics can help there.
Why don't you like the word holistic?
Well, it sounds a bit esoteric, but what is really meant is that, and that usually puts off people who are kind of more analytic thinking like try to have like very concrete definitions of problems. But I do think that, for example, the SDGs, they help understand the interdependencies between sustainability challenges, how health, sustainability, inequality, how that belongs together and has to be solved at the same time.
So you have been also not as of now you are teaching about this, but you have been also researching different topics related to the SDGs, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's right. I've been mainly looking at the politics of SDG indicators. So everyone knows the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, but fewer people have really looked at the ways in which progress is monitored. And this is done through indicators. But what many people don't know is that there's tons of indicators. Okay, fine, people know that. But then at each level of governance, so UN, but also Europe or a national, regional, even city, urban, communal governance level, they have their own sustainability indicators. And so there's a politics about, okay, who gets to decide what these indicators are, who's involved, and do they actually mirror the truth? So if we are doing well in these indicators, does that mean we become more sustainable? And it's no easy answer, of course, but we need to think not just about how to become more sustainable, but how to better measure sustainability as well.
Yeah, you just made, of course, a great point. And if I think about, for example, right now, the decision to consider gas and nuclear energy into the renewable energy, then the energies then tell us a lot about what you are saying. Can you tell us a little bit more about what does it mean not looking enough at this as well? Indicators, if you want.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting thing that happened with the EU taxonomy that you mentioned. So the question of which financial assets count as sustainable. There are 2 points here, really. The first one is to some extent, some of these problems are gonna solve themselves if things become uninsurable. So if you can't do certain economic activities because the climate risks are too high, then banks won't give you loans for it. And this is happening already. To some extent, the question is, how important is the taxonomy will be answered. Okay, well, that would be very optimistic. I guess another perspective on this from a pluralist perspective is that different countries have different understandings of sustainability. Well, if their understanding of sustainability involves burning fossil fuels and, coal production, that's definitely bad. But I would still say that a pluralist economic approach to this question would say, no, actually, there are different pathways to sustainability, and different countries with different contextual conditions need to find different pathways. And I think scientists need to show these different options. And it's not just one transformation. We need different types of transformations. And that might mean that different countries have different solutions to the sustainability crisis, even though we all know, okay, there are these planetary boundaries. We need to cut fossil fuel production. We need to halt emissions to sustainable levels. That's clear, but the ways might be plural.
Yeah, this is also what you just said. It is also for the students. If we go back to what the students need, what you are teaching to the students, what kind of competences you think that they might need, mm-hmm. and what would this bring to the society, to the world, if you want?
Mm-hmm. I think. Just take the example you just gave. It's about taking the other perspective. First of all, knowing the other perspective, what perspectives, what well-reasoned arguments are out there, what other ways to feel about this are out there. How can I put myself into someone else's shoes, right? And this kind of sensibility for other intellectual endeavors, but just other interests and other worldviews is super important. And here I think my university, Karlshochschule, is decidedly international, intercultural, and it's kind of the key focus is to enable students to put themselves into others' positions, and then hopefully by a better understanding of the position of others, we can come to better agreements or have even better arguments about things.
Interestingly, we keep saying we live in a globalized world, and we live in a globalized society. We are interconnected, and we are one humanity. But we are really not knowledgeable about, for example, the histories of other countries, the realities, the economic realities of other countries. And I really think that is something missing. What do you think, Robert? I would bring in this. Also as a member of, for example, the Global Young Academy, this really global, bringing different perspectives, truly different perspective into the conversations. What does it mean for European students?
Yes, great question. Well, I think globalization, for the most part, is taught in the global north as something that is top down. So we talk about the globalization of big financial institutions or international organizations, which is super important. And students need to know about that because policy matters. And if you have ideas about how to improve globalization, you need to know the relevant actors and policies out there. But just this semester, I taught a course that was called Globalization from Below. And the idea was to really look at globalization from the other perspective. How are kind of informal networks actually shaping globalization? What alternatives are out there to see globalization from below? From a more grassroots perspectives, you could say, but also what methods are there? For example, ethnographic methods, where you look at the individual in their context, and you see that globalization is not just the homogeneous force, but it's a very fragmented dynamics that you need different sensibilities and competencies to understand it. So it's not just about big data and analyzing big institutions, but it's also about, ethnographic understanding how the individual is doing in globalization. And to make this more concrete, this also means, for example, taking decolonial perspectives. So understanding that much of the wealth that we have is directly related to, historic oppression of the global South or continued oppression of the global South. And I think it was the first job advert that I read in a long time where they explicitly looked for people who introduce post-colonial and decolonial theory in teaching. So yeah, I was really happy when I read that job advert.
Economics is, of course, very, very important because it is very often follow the money, right? So the relationship between power and money, if you want, how do you see it?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. Well, I guess most academic economists, they definitely didn't follow the money themselves. Otherwise, they wouldn't be academic economists. So yes, of course, in the history of economics, and it's less kind of academic economists that are, I'd say, problematic. It's more the people who have taken economics 101. The issue is really the introduction to economics courses. If you are taught about neoclassical economic man, then you come, and there's several studies on this, right? Then this simplistic view of the economy can kind of distribute. It's less of a problem in academic economics, where if you look at top journals, they're all about sustainability, inequality, poverty, solving problems, often with, now fancy econometric methods and so on. But there's really a huge discrepancy between what economists teach and what economists research, right? So it's more about the kind of economistic mindset than about what's happening in academia. And I'm much more interested and worried about how we teach economics than what's happening in scientific journals. what else can we do as economists? And there, I think interaction with the public on eye level is super important, meaning, for example, on social media, involving oneself into debates about sustainability. We need much more of that. And here, whether that's on Twitter, TikTok, or on YouTube, it will be great if, well, more academics were involved. There are already many people involved in social media, of course, but I think we can do even more. And I think it would be great if more science communication would include social sciences, and more social science communication would be on eye level rather than top down.
How do you think that this kind of approaches that you are using, for example, now in Karlsruhe, how are going this to change academia, or what does academia need right now?
Well, I guess my first answer to this is not that inspiring. It's good working conditions for young academics and young scientists. All these lofty ideals of improving economics, transdisciplinarity, better science communication, having input to policy only works if you are a young economist and you want to be a policy advisor and an economist, then you need to give people job security and the ability to plan your academic career. So with the growing precarization of not just economics, but all academic jobs, specifically in Germany, you need to take care of the employment conditions of scientists, and then we can talk about what else needs to happen. I see that in Germany specifically as a big problem. But that's, I guess, only from my perspective as an academic. But yeah, we need better working conditions for scientists, young scientists.
During the last years, besides, of course, Corona, we have been speaking a lot, and you have been also engaged with this in a way that with Friday for Futures and all the movement coming from young people. Mm-hmm. How do you see this related to now, perhaps to the interest also for the course that you teach?
Yeah, very, very interesting. We could fill an hour speaking about Fridays for Future and how this is a really interesting social movement because it is so broad, and some of it includes scientists as well. So there's scientists for future as well. There's also economists for future, both of which I'm part of. And within the movement, you have quite more what they call eco-modern, so more like moderate. That's the main, most of it is eco-modern, and some more radical factions. So I do see Fridays for Futures not just changing public discourse, but also debates within academia. So anytime you speak about like a grant proposal, it's always, okay, how do we relate this to Fridays for Future? So Fridays for Future has already changed society, but it's also changing academic logics. And so that's exciting. And of course, always interested to invite people, activists inside to classes, and then reflect upon them with academic tools. It's not just about being an activist, but it's about being reflective and also about challenging them with intellectual arguments and with contradictions, and saying, well, actually, have you thought that through? And the university is a place for debate, and it can be polarized. It must be polarized. There must be dissent as well. So yeah, love activists, to have activists in the classroom, and then let's debate.
Robert, what can academia learn from activists? What can an activist learn from interacting with academia? Of course, and what needs policy to learn from this new context?
That's a really good question. I don't think I have a very clever answer to that. I do think, though, that both can learn to be in more pluralist settings and strive to also be in pluralist settings. What I mean with that is whether you're in academia or in an NGO or in social activism, exposing yourself to contradicting opinions and public fora and things rather than boycotting them or not being part of them. I think it's very helpful to learn how how people think. It's coming back to the like taking the perspective of others, walking in the shoes of others. And I think both academia and activists can learn from listening to others. It's very simple, but it's much easier to close your eyes than to open your eyes. And I would encourage both academia. It's a bit of a generalist answer, but it's about like seeking out different opinions.
We speak very often about the win-win situation. Yeah. Also, you as an economics professor, I mean, this is so we can change in a way that it doesn't hurt, perhaps. And how do you see it?
Very nice question. One of the good things about neoclassical economics, I would have never thought that I start a sentence like this, is that it makes you aware of trade-offs, right? And so if you go through the world and think there are no trade-offs at all, you're not living in the real world. So you need to think about trade-offs, but you can't just think about trade-offs. And specifically, when you think about sustainability, there are no pure win-win-win situations, but there are things that come pretty close. And so one of the tasks of economists is to help people maybe prioritize some options. So just thinking, for example, things that make a huge difference, but are not as complicated to do as other things. For example, a carbon tax, like taxing carbon emissions, is easier than regulating how people use SUVs, whether, how many flights are people allowed to do a year. So, and it would be more effective. So economists can help kind of prioritizing certain policy instruments. That would be one answer. And then there are things that have many different co-benefits. For example, having a plant-based diet helps not just with, halting biodiversity losses, but it also reduces methane, which is, again, a huge contributor to global warming. So if we just found instruments, whether that's like policy instruments, or if we encourage people more, like if we ask social movements, hey, we really need to tackle this issue of biodiversity, and plant-based diets are like the way forward, there are things that have these co-benefits that are better than others. And I think economics, the economics profession, can help make societal debate better by saying, okay, some things are really more important and better than others here.
Inequalities in countries, but also among countries, of course, and what does it mean as a reflection, of course, for the future? Because, for example, so what I'm thinking, that there are, of course, people saying, okay, you cannot expect that countries in Africa now, they do not have any emissions, but they need it to eventually catch up with the development. And on the other hand, there are other people say, okay, but who says that we need this kind of development to be happy in life? Also, on one hand, also related to this climate situation, but on the other hand, also about the directions. Can we really have an heterodox or pluralist approach to it? How do you see, Robert?
Mm-hmm. Yes, two very different questions, I guess. Yes. Relating to kind of historical injustices there and carbon emissions, and the normative ethical question of who gets to emit in order to fill up the remaining carbon budget that we have, CO2 budget, okay. And there you have lots of people say, okay, we need kind of degrowth policies and so on, like very big, ambitious ideological debates that are unfortunately quite far removed from the policy debate or debate in society more generally. So yes, it's important to think about these alternative visions, but right now they're too far from the practical problems that most people are concerned about. Even though we are living in a deeply unsustainable system, it's the question is how big our visions how big can we afford our visions to be right now? So I'm not sure. I only know that if we want to tackle the question of the international distribution of carbon budget, I wish people would read more into like the economic colonial history to understand where does industrialization come from, how was it made possible, and who now deserves to emit more. And yes, we need to to solve the dual problem of global poverty and climate change. And there is a need for compensating for, if that's at all possible, for international slave trade and so on, the colonial history that we have. The second question was about inequalities, and my answer is going to be shorter. The SDGs are great on this because they recognize that inequalities are multidimensional. They're not just about financial disparities, but they're about health, access to education, wealth, of course, but they're multidimensional. And I think economists can contribute by seeing how concentration of wealth impacts inequalities, right? And because if you have concentration of wealth, that means concentration of powers, that means inequalities. And this link is actually quite well described in the SDGs. So I would encourage economists and others to think through these problems through the SDGs.
Robert, what have you seen changing? As we can also stay in Germany or in Europe. What have you seen? What has changed in the last years?
Throughout COVID, throughout the last 2 years, the topic of climate change was nearly always the most discussed topic in society. And it seems as if this is not going away. And my hope would be that this climate topic would be broadened to include other sustainability issues as well. And then gradually we come to the realization that there's not just a simple technical fix to this, but it's really a matter of merging, technical solutions and solutions from climate justice. So thinking about the societal aspects that are needed to, also compensate those who might be hit by higher fuel prices, by higher prices for operating a car, or other ways helping them make the switch to more sustainable forms of transportation, consumption, and production, and so on. So it's really about, well, my wish would, it's more about my hope, really, that yes, the topic of climate is there, but we need to broaden it to a more social sustainability frame. That would be my hope, and I do think that I see this in society as well.
And Robert, you are also a father, and you are an engaged father, if I say this. And what do you think are the most important skills or the most important lesson or message, if you want, that for your kids, so from their perspective, if you want?
Ooh, for my kids, that's tricky. We at our university we subscribe. I mean, we say we are like a feminist, anti-racist institution, but we're also an institution that engages in ethics of care. Like, that's our goal. And so the ethics of care is thinking about the private and public lives of people working in organizations and being mindful about them. And so I think academia can do lots more to be family friendly. I mean, starting with, like in Germany, we have free kindergarten, which is fantastic, and the school system and childcare that's free. That's generous support for fathers and mothers to take years out to take care of the kids, and specifically for fathers to actually take then these years off. It's the idea to have that it's totally fine to work part-time, and that you should be able to climb through the career ladders even though you're part-time, because we know that it's so important to and that we know that the parents are fantastic multitaskers as well, and as you know. So, and it's about, of course, if you ask me about, okay, what to teach the kids, it's about changing masculinities, of course, right? It's about teaching my kids about, gender challenges and histories of the patriarchy and all that stuff, which I do. And it's just trying to live kind of equitable lives in relationships. So in my case, like with my wife, we try to separate the cognitive labor and the household work as best as possible with 2 jobs and 3 kids, right? That's always tricky. But we try to do that as equitable as possible. And and if institutions make that possible, like through virtual work, especially home office, super important. More people want that. And it's very important to balance like family and career. I don't know to how many people this applies, because this is like true for academics who can, could work from home more often, but many people don't have that option. So yeah, I guess the answer will be different for different types of occupations.
And Robert, what do you look forward to? What are your next project? What is the one topic that you would like to dive more in from a professional perspective? What do you look forward to the future?
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to creating an introductory course to Pluralist Economics at Karls, which I'm working on now, and just to teach kind of introductory courses in what we've just talked about, and really thinking more systematically on how to bring topics of sustainability into economic teaching. And that's not just climate and biodiversity, but it's also pollution topics that I'm very enthusiastic about. Not about the pollution, but about how to tackle them. Yeah.
Robert, you mentioned pollution, and what are your main concerns? So what are the things that you think we should think more about and let people more know about?
Yes, thanks. I was very happy to see that many people now care about plastics pollution, specifically in the oceans, and that's a huge issue. And the same is true also for chemical pollution. So specifically, I work on pesticide pollution and how that's a massive problem, specifically in the Global South. And I do want to encourage people to think about this, not just from the endpoint, so when it's out there, but thinking how can we make production systems more sustainable? And that might mean maybe consuming less, but also how to regulate producers such that the plastics won't even end up in the stores, right? And that we won't need the pesticides on the fields, right? How can we move away from these pollution angles from the end towards more of the source, right? And what can economists do to help that? That's one of my projects.
And what would be the society you dream of? Also, if we can really dream big in 30 years or 15 years, as for...
It would be a society that would be sustainable and it would be just, right? And that would mean that we wouldn't need to worry about the existence and survival of of the coming generations, and there would be plenty of resources, intellectual resources and material resources for everyone. And like speaking from an academic's perspective, I wish people could make the choices that I have, namely to engage in intellectual or artistic, aesthetic activities. This would be the ideal society for me, when people could choose to engage in these, abstract ideas, writing books, thinking, listening to music, have space and time for that. That would be my ideal society, where more people can feel the joy that I feel when I'm, pursuing my job and just like doing what I do for a living. If more people could do that, that for me would be a great society. I guess other people have other perspectives, but that's what plural perspectives are for.
I know it's a big question, but what is life about for you?
Love.
Do you have a personal dream more?
Well, continue loving and being loved. I guess if having kids, you pretty much know what pure love looks like. And any second spent enjoying this love, furthering this love, nurturing this love is what life is all about. Sorry to get all soppy, but I think that's the correct answer to that question.
It is, in my opinion, the only answer to the questions. Robert, thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you.